Hey everyone, it's Lindsay and Sarah just popping in here at the top of the episode.
If you've been listening the past few months, you'll know that Nicole is currently on maternity leave with her second son.
However, we managed to sneak in this episode's recording back in September before she went away, so don't be too confused when you hear her here in a couple of moments. One other quick thing before we get into the episode, we just celebrated our 7th anniversary. So crazy!
So crazy. And we wanted to take this time to get some feedback from you, our listeners, so we made up a little survey to find out a little bit more about what you like about us. You can find it in the show notes and also on our social media.
Speaking of social media, while Nicole and her family are doing great, she still hasn't decided about when she's going to be coming back, so we are not entirely sure when our next episode will be, but you can follow us on social media to hear more about our upcoming schedule, and of course, subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode.
We've got 2 great Christmassy podcasts from the past, episodes 9 and 21. So if you want to get into the spirit while you wait for us, you can listen to those. Plus, of course, we have this amazing episode for you that you are about to hear. So enjoy that and have a whaley great day.
Hello, everybody. I'm Nicole.
I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Sarah, and together we're the co-founders of Whale Tales, a living library of cetacean stories.
Today, we are very excited to be reconnecting with a friend from our community.
And some community science.
So sit back and enjoy as we dive right in.
It's always awesome when we get to just, use the podcast as a reason to reach out to friends that we haven't talked to in a long time. Be like, hey, friend, do you want to be on the podcast with us? And today we're very, very excited to have long time friend of ours, Caitlin Birdsall, joining us. Actually, Yay. Caitlin, is your last name still Birdsall?
Yeah, it sure is.
Well,
thanks.
People change their name and don't when they have various life changes. Anyways, Caitlin's here.
Caitlin's here.
I'm here. Thanks for having me. I'm so honored to be here.
Caitlin, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are, what you do, why you are connected to cetaceans, and a great guest for Whale Tales.
Oh, well, I'm not so sure I'm a great guest, but we'll see how this next little while rolls out. My name's Caitlin. I have known Sarah and Lindsay and Nicole for many, many years. We all used to work together. I have been working in the world of sort of cetaceans, for at least 15 years now, which feels crazy. It also makes me feel very, very, very old. So old. You guys, we are so old. It's kind of when I say that, it seems crazy because I it was kind of like that thing that you wanted to do when you were a kid and you never actually thought you would do it because it wasn't like a real job. That was definitely me. And the fact that I've gotten to had the chance to spend so much time learning about cetaceans and talking about cetaceans in my life is pretty wild. Definitely a dream come true. So I started off actually working at the Vancouver Aquarium Marine Science Center. I was an interpreter there, sort of shortly after I got out of university for a couple of years. And that really cemented me back into sort of the world of marine education. And when I also started learning about more of the research happening on our coast, I left there and went to work in the incredible small boardwalk community of Telegraph Cove for several years, where I worked on boats with Stubbs Island Whale Watching, which was a company that ran out of that place, and I got to spend a lot of time learning about wild cetaceans in sort of the area of Johnston Strait. And then was really lucky to get a job with Dr. Lance Barrett Leonard at the Vancouver Aquarium Marine Science Center in their research arm that's since become Oceanwise Conservation Association. And for the last close to 12 years, I've worked there. And actually tomorrow is my last day with Oceanwise. But I do hope that, I will continue in the world of sort of cetacean and marine research and education and conservation as my career moves forward.
It's so crazy to think about the fact that like you trained me. Actually, one of the things that that I look back at so fondly when I was first starting straight out of, I wasn't even out of university yet. I was still in university. Actually, you were one of the first people who kind of like taught me how to talk about cetaceans, both at the aquarium and when I came up to visit you at Stubbs, and was like, I know do this. This is so cool.
Remember. Yeah, it is. I mean, I look back on those times really fondly, especially that kind of discovery time in our lives, right? Where we were just learning so much. Definitely that time working for Stubbs and in Johnston Strait was like so formative in my life, and getting to spend time learning about northern resident killer whales and seeing the kind of beginning of the humpback comeback in that area was really, really special. Yeah, pretty spectacular. And I should mention that time was really formative also because I joined forces with a bunch of friends up there, and we actually started the Marine Education and Research Society, which is also a nonprofit organization that I've sat on the board since we first started 11 years ago. So that area, those whales also brought me, another way to engage and learn. Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons that we thought you would be such a great guest, specifically for this episode, not just for any episode, although you probably could speak to almost everything we would want to talk about, is because we have talked about citizen science or community science, and this is actually just a great chance for our listeners. I'm going to give a bit of a disclaimer. We know that there have been kind of various reasons why people use both of those terms, and that there's a lot going on in sort of the larger research community about whether we should be labeling these sorts of projects run by just members of the public with help from real researchers as citizen science projects or community science projects. We might use those words interchangeably today, any one of the four of us. So just forgive us if you're used to using one and we use it because they're used differently kind of all over the world. But we have talked about those kinds of projects on the podcast numerous times in the past, but always as sort of a call to action for whatever larger species we're having a discussion about. And we haven't ever devoted an episode entirely to talking about the value of citizen science projects, the ways in which communities can get involved in science projects. And we thought it was about time that we did. And one of the things that I really, really associate with you is your passion for involving members of the public in meaningful science work, and really, really, from like an outreach perspective, connecting communities with the research going on in their backwaters. Yards? Sure. The oceans around them.
Their aquatic neighborhood.
Yeah, exactly.
They're aquatic neighborhoods. Yeah. I usually call them marine backyards, but that's perfect. Yeah. And just listening to you say that, Nicole, like really makes my like heart expand. I should give a like disclaimer, that I've been on parental leave for the last year. So I'm still wrapping my head back around kind of being back in the work world. And hearing that really reminds me of like what I love to do. And I think it's so true. This idea that people can be involved in science, I think is so not only important for science, but important for our communities, because it allows people to really become part of the scientific process and sort of investigate what is they have access to. But I think community or citizen science is particularly well matched to cetaceans. And so I should say I have worked on citizen science projects for many, many years. The one we have, of course, here in BC related to cetaceans. Well, we have several, but the one that I have been involved in that's sort of coast-wide is the BC Citations Sightings Network. It's just a project so near to my heart. So I'm so excited that you guys want to talk about this today, and talk about the idea of citizen science and how that relates to cetaceans, because I think they're like a match made in heaven. Not really heaven. Match made in like a really good day watching whales, which is the perfect thing, right?
It is. That's what I would like to do. So
Mm-hmm.
why don't you kind of start us off, Caitlin, by telling, for our listeners, we have a lot of listeners in BC, but we have a lot of listeners, it turns out, all over the world, a little bit of kind of the Caitlin's Notes version of what is the BC Citations Sightings Network. You have been involved in it for over a decade, and you've really, really seen it grow from a very, very small grassroots project to open it. You were the one who went and opened a new office for the BC Citations Sightings Network in another part of the province. So what is it, and how has it grown?
Yeah, so the BC Citations Sightings Network is a community science project. And what I always think is like kind of fun or funny is that like when I started there working with that project like 12 years ago, we didn't even have that term. Like not only community science, we didn't even call it citizen science. I remember like a few years in starting to use that and people being like, what are you talking about? So it's kind of been cool to be involved in essentially a citizen science project before we were calling it citizen science. So that's really neat. So it is a project that looks at engaging people that spend time on or near the water to report their sightings of whales, dolphins, and porpoises. That project has multiple ways that you can do that. Back when I started, we literally had like carbon copy paper logbooks that we gave out. Now, of course, we have an app and things like that. But yeah, it's a way for us to monitor cetacean occurrence along the coast using people who are already on the water. And earlier, I sort of mentioned how I think community science is so well suited for cetaceans. And the reason is because we can't be on the water all the time. It's really hard and really expensive to study whales. It's just, you can't be out there all the time. There's not enough scientists. This coast is way too big. Whales are way too hard to find. So why not take advantage of all those eyes that might be out there? And so anyone can be an observer. It is an opportunistic sightings network. And maybe we can talk about that in a little bit about how some community sciences differ between sort of like dedicated versus opportunistic. But the sightings network is opportunistic, which means if you're out there and you see something, you can report it. We're not asking you to go regularly. We're not asking you to run a certain track line. Just if you see it, report it. But what this has given that project is this huge database collected primarily over the last 20 years, but we even had some historical data way back that allowed us to look at sort of trends in when and where different cetaceans were being seen. And there's a lot kind of stuff behind the scenes that team that now runs that project are doing to kind of quantify observer effort and to really make that data quite meaningful. But it has meant that we've been able to collect a lot of information on cetaceans, a lot of these populations at risk that probably would never have been collected without sort of this kind of network of observers, because we just could have never had that number of scientists out on the water all the time looking for whales. Is that a good Cole's note? It wasn't very short. Sorry.
To give, even just myself, not just our listeners, but to give ourselves kind of some perspective on that, there's no need for you to know the exact numbers to the questions that I'm about to ask you. But just from a ballpark perspective, like how many observers would you estimate? And this could be in the, if you can't get an exact number, like within the tens to hundreds estimate that there are now working on this project.
Oh, it's such a good question, Nicole, but I've been off for a year, so I can't think of a good one. It definitely is like, I would say close to about 10,000 people who have at some point reported. But observers can be really different. And I think that this is another thing to think about with community science or citizen science, is that anyone can participate because, especially in opportunistic projects, because often you can report once or you can report 1,000 times. It just depends on your access. And there's in an opportunistic kind of community science project, there's no sort of, commitment. So, if you happen to be visiting the coast and you see something, you could report it. Or if you happen to work on the water every single day and see something every single day, you can report that as well. So one of the things that I think is so cool is that it is really inclusive. So the number is really big, but some of those observers in there, especially kind of like a core group, are really dedicated. We get a huge number of sightings from, whereas, there are definitely quite a number of observers as well who've just reported a handful of times that was the most that they've ever seen, sort of thing. So yeah. So it's a big group. And one of my joys in working with that project in the past was really getting to know those observers and making those connections, and getting them excited about it. It was so cool when people really got engaged and like, we're so excited to tell you about the thing they just saw. I have this, like, my favorite observer ever is a woman that lived on Quadra Island, and she started reporting kind of right when I had started working with that project, and she was getting really excited about what she was seeing, and I was able to ID some of the whales for her and tell her a little bit about them, and it really sparked something in her, and she made this own little network on her island where they all like kept their eyes open and reported to each other, and then she would enter the data in for us, and it was just like, it was so cool to see how like bigger projects can and that engagement in that scientific process really had like a snowball effect within her neighborhood and her community as well. She got so excited about it that she really started like recruiting all these people to help us out. I love that, anyone can be a part of these types of projects. You don't have to be a scientist.
Oh my gosh, I love that story so much.
I know. She's my favorite.
That's so cute. And I think to the point that you were making about, the value from a data perspective, let alone what you do with that data, and we'll get to that in a minute. Just like you said, tens of thousands of observers. I don't think that I would be overestimating to say millions, if not tens of millions of sightings, right? At this point in time?
No, not that many.
Okay.
Let's see. I should have checked before I came on. But we get about I don't even want to take a guess, but it's not that many. But it is a lot. Like it's like hundreds of thousands of sightings. Absolutely. Sort of over the last 20 years, which is still like an enormous amount of data. When you think about like on an average, like survey day, depending on where you are, you might only have, like a handful of sightings. I should mention that for the Sightings Network and for a lot of kind of cetacean citizen science, a sighting can be multiple animals. So, you can say, I saw a group of 500 dolphins, and that's one sighting. So the number of animals and the number of sightings is a little bit different. But that project is huge and coastwide, and really meaningful in terms of both gathering some really cool data, but also in that engagement piece. And I think that those really are both really valuable. So one of the things about community science or citizen science that I like is that it's not just scientists then saying, give me your data and I'm going to run away with it. But there's, I think really good ones are reciprocal, and that there is that engagement piece. People get value, they get feedback. And that's something I learned through working with the Sightings Network over the years, is that that feedback back to people and that communication and that, information was really a key piece of keeping them engaged and wanting to be sort of citizen scientists. Because if it just goes into an app and you never hear anything ever again, it's kind of like this black hole, right? So having some sort of piece of feedback, someone telling you, I got it, this is what it's going towards, here's what we're working on right now, I think was really, really valuable. And if anyone anyone's listening, I am not a citizen science expert, but I would give you that tip. Make sure you always have that feedback and that it's pretty regular.
Yeah. It's a good way to like keep people coming back and like continuing that cycle of like long-term participants rather than one-off participants.
Yeah. One of the, just kind of switching gears. So obviously I worked with the Sightings Network for many years. But with the Marine Education and Research Society, we've been really involved in collecting data on humpback whales, especially around northern Vancouver Island. And that has a citizen science or community science component too. So that project really works on gathering additional fluke photos or dorsal photos from people who are on the water. So it's a little bit more technical. People have to have photos. They have to know how to take those photos, but they can submit them in. And that is like hugely engaging. People get like really, really into it because then they get to know who the whale is. And our team with MERS has really, got that piece down of like, let me tell you about that whale, what we know about it, all that thing. And so, again, sort of that engagement piece in really identifying, and getting to feel like a little bit like a marine biologist is, I think, really exciting for people. A lot of us had that dream as little kids, and then our dreams took us elsewhere, but there's still that little like 8-year-old that was like, I want to be a marine biologist. So I think that's kind of a fun way to allow people a little piece of that as well.
So some of these programs have been running for like a pretty long time, like many years. And I know they're done in collaboration with professional researchers. Do you have any examples of any like research projects that have used the data that come from these citizen science projects?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the key things. So I think, that one of the definitions that you see of citizen science is sort of the public or like a dedicated group of non-scientists collecting information and working with kind of scientific professionals in a collaboration. I like to say it as like a collaboration because one wouldn't happen without the other, to like uncover things about our natural world or other types of science. So yeah, I think, valuable citizen scientists do have that extra component that, again, it's not just data collecting for the sake of data collecting, but that data does go to something. So yeah, I mean, with the Sightings Network, that project, that data gets used really often in 10s, 20s or more projects a year. So scientists can request to access that data for reasons. Some things that has gone towards is looking at like overlap of cetacean populations and activities that happen that may put them at risk. So maybe potentially certain types of fisheries that have higher entanglement rates or large vessel traffic that may result in ship strikes. Of course, with the humpback work that MERS does, using that data collected kind of from these citizen scientists around that area, we can look at sort of population growth in humpback whales or changes in distribution as well, because when we know the individuals, we can look much more closely at sort of, is it more humpbacks, or is it the same humpbacks but using different areas, or are these humpbacks that used to use this area just shifting into a new area, or is it an increased population, for example? So yeah, lots of different examples of using this for kind of scientific questions. And I should mention that, another kind of powerful way that we can use this sort of community collected data is for sort of conservation and protection as well. So one thing that the BC Cetacean Sightings Network has done with that data is start to use it to try and reduce the impact of large vessel traffic on cetaceans. So what that project has done is take sightings that are coming in real time. So now that we have apps, because we're in the 21st century, and to then broadcast those back out to pilots or captains of large vessels to let them know that there are cetaceans in their vicinity. So one thing that we know is that, for example, those really big vessels coming in from offshore, big shipping vessels, one, it's really hard for them to see right off or right around them. So they're really big vessels that, their line of sight is quite far. Often it's hard for them to see cetaceans. It's also hard for them to take quick maneuvers. So the more sort of awareness they have, there might be a cetacean around, it's in this area. Okay, maybe we can take this diversionary tactic right now to reduce either, disturbance and or potential ship strike. Is a way, to hopefully reduce threats to these animals. So that's another really cool sort of real world application of community science. So we're taking sightings that have high confidence, I should say. So sightings that where people feel really certain of what they're seeing. We do ask citizen scientists to rate how they, their confidence in their sighting, and then broadcast that back out to sort of the subset of mariners that don't want to see whales. They don't want to see them. They don't want to be near them. And so we're saying they're here. Do what you can do to get away from them, kind of thing. And so that's kind of, I think, a really powerful way for this information to be used. Really a way I think people should feel really proud of contributing to that because, as we know, a lot of populations are really impacted by vessel-driven threats.
So regardless of if you're near a big ship or not, how do you go about submitting a sighting on this fancy app that you have?
Reporting a sighting to the Sightings Network is pretty easy. So there's an app called Whale Report. You can download it. It's free. Easy peasy. If you're not an app person, there is still like a web form online. If you want to go like super old school, there like probably is like a couple paper logbooks still kicking around. You can throw one on your boat. So that's really easy. But I encourage people to look up. There's a lot of these types of projects. So the BC Cetacean Sightings Network is one that we have here on the coast. But there are similar projects in a lot of different parts of North America and even the world as well. So if you're not here in BC, look them up. And there's lots of great apps out there that do really similar projects. And then, things like if you are someone who is taking photos of these animals, submit them, please do, because, if you submit them to the Sightings Network, they will sort of filter them off to other places. If you're around sort of central northern Vancouver Island, you can contact the Marine Education and Research Society directly. That's a little, is a little more involved, but also really valuable. And the more information you can collect when you are around cetaceans, like someone's going to want it truly or want to hear about it, right? Because this type of information is quite valuable. And it's also a way for scientists, even if it doesn't go into a database, to at least like have in the back of their mind, like, oh, this was happening. Good to know, kind of thing. So I guess that's sort of my plug, is just have a look for it. But there's an app for the BC Cetacean Sightings Network, and there I will say that there are lots of other smaller projects looking at cetaceans on our coast that also encourage people to contribute. I'm sure other people will be like, but what about this? So I do want to mention that there definitely are other ones out there too.
Yeah, we have a list that I actually haven't looked at in a couple of years, but we do have a list on our website that we'll put in the show notes of sightings networks that we've gathered from around the world, including, of course, BCCSN and MARES, and then a Happy Whale when we talked to Ted last in the spring, the Porpoise Conservation Society when we talked to them a couple of years ago, all sorts of things. But yeah, if you're on the coast, and a thing to note, of course, like as opposed to something like with Ted, with like the flukes, is that you guys want to know if you aren't able to get a photo, it's still worth reporting the sighting.
It's
That's
totally
still
still worth. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's one of the things that I think has been really cool about the Sightings Network is that it's like low barrier, right? So it's opportunistic, so you don't have to sign up in advance. You can, you don't even have to have the app. Just like write some notes down in your, like, on your phone or on the back of your hand or in a piece of paper if you're old school. And then you can submit it after the fact. So it is, you don't have to do anything in advance, and there's no commitment. So of course we want to hear every time you see it, but that's, if you're, like I said, if you're only around Wales once, then report it once, and that's fine. And you also don't have to submit photos. Photos are great. They're a bonus, but no big deal. It also has, and a lot of community science projects really have this. There's a lot of resources to help you. And there are people on the back end of these projects that will help you as well. So if you're not sure what you saw, like there are, ID guides out there and associated with these projects or on the apps and stuff like that will help you determine that. And if you still don't know, there is someone back there. If you say, like, this is what I think I saw, and one of the things that I used to do when I was working with the Sightings Network is, connect back with those people and say, okay, let me ask you this section of questions. Let me send you these pictures. What do you think? And often we could kind of get down to at least a fairly confident or a probable sighting. So don't feel like you have to have the skills. This is a place to get those skills and to do that learning. Mm-hmm.
One other question I had for you, Caitlin, is we know, and we try to list, but you're right, I haven't looked at that web. That's part of our site in a long time either, so it might be worth an update. But there are probably listeners of ours living in coastal areas where there may not be a community or citizen science project going on. Would you have any advice if people are living coastally where there are cetaceans, about how people might go about starting something in their own community if there isn't something already happening?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I would, oh God. Yeah, lots of thoughts on that. Let me organize them in my brain. So one, I would say, like, go for it. So one of the things, I don't necessarily consider myself a scientist, but I do consider myself a naturalist in kind of that old school way. And I think that there's a lot of room for people to become naturalists, and all you have to be is an observer and curious and interested in starting to make those observations. And so I encourage people to be those kinds of naturalists and to start making those notes. So you can do that all on your own. You can build your own personal citizen science project. But if you're wanting to kind of create something bigger, I mean, like I was just talking about that one observer on Quadra Island, or another example would be a group I know on Saturna Island, which has kind of created, their own neighborhood project where they observe together, they alert each other. They've even started to collect data together. So talk to your friends around, and sort of decide, okay, are we going to start paying attention? We'll let each other know. And I think really early on, it's great to have sort of a set of what you collect. So, where are you? What time is it? What's going on with the weather sometimes can be helpful. How far away was this animal? How many were there? A little bit about what that animal was doing. And from there, you have a bunch of data already. You can start putting points on maps. I would also say don't start from scratch. There is a lot of free tools already out there. So even if you're nowhere near BC, there is these worldwide projects like the iNaturalist project, for example, which can be used as a data collection tool for yourself. There's other really simple downloads that you can create that would make yourself like a little mini sort of data collecting sheet, for example. So there's lots of resources out there. Check out other, if you wanted to start a project, check out some of the other citizen science or community science projects doing something similar. What do they collect? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? I talk about things being low barrier, which I think is really good if you're doing a very, very big, broad scope, multi-species, huge coast type project. But if it's just, this bay that I live on, put some parameters around it. So we're going to go look every day. Someone's going to go for an hour, between this time and this time, or we all go on Saturdays or something, because that also gives you an extra piece of information that opportunistic projects don't get, which is kind of effort, which down the road can be very, very useful because you have that information about how often you were there. And that allows you to quantify sort of when you were seeing and when you weren't, and how representative that is of sort of the norm or sort of a regular kind of season. So, I think it's also okay to start small and to change your mind. I mean, of course, it would be amazing to create like the perfect community science project from scratch right away, bang, boom. But that's probably unlikely. So just start. My biggest piece of advice is just start. And the practice of my last thing I'll say, is that the practice of community or citizen science has come so far. Like there is conferences, there are journals now, there is a lot of information about that. So also, if someone who is like a scientist right now is listening to this and wants to start that, that might be somewhere where you dive in, you start going through the academic literature, or if you're not a scientist, you can do that too. But there is really a lot of kind of work that's been done that looks at how they're successful or how they're not successful, and best practices, and things like that. And I would say those things, many things.
Those are all good, helpful things. Thank you, Caitlin.
Yeah, no worries.
Are you ready for what is my favorite part of the show? Which is when I get to sing a little bit and then you tell us something fun.
I am ready to hear your jingle. Go for it.
Fun, 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 flipper fact. It's time for a fun flipper fact with Caitlin. That one's just for you because we both have kids and I have been watching a lot of Dora lately.
And I'm like, I feel like this is referencing something.
Very, very, very good. I love it. I will sing it to my 3-year-old tomorrow.
So Caitlin, can you share with us and our listeners one of, if not your absolute favorite cetacean fact, please and thank you?
Okay, so one of, because there are many, but one of my favorite cetacean facts is, I alluded to this with you guys earlier, not super PG, but it has to do with flying porpoise sex. So, dun, dun, dun. Can we just leave it there? So, this is my favorite. So, the smallest cetacean, as I'm sure you all and many of your listeners know, on our coast here in BC, is the harbor porpoise. And harbor porpoises, I feel, kind of just get ignored a lot of the time. Not by those wonderful folks at the Porpoise Society, but most other people, because they're small. They can sometimes be a little bit unassuming at the surface. So, we kind of get a quick glimpse and often they're gone. And so, I don't think people often think they're too exciting, but they are wild, you guys. So when I moved to Prince Rupert, I was greeted one of my first times on the water by this like wild porpoise party happening at the entrance to the Prince Rupert Harbor. And my like brain was blown. I was like, what is happening? I'd never seen porpoises acting like this. They were zipping around. There were literally probably over 100 of them. So that in itself is quite unusual. We do not usually get big groups like that. And at one point, this porpoise came flying out of the water, which again is not super typical behavior of a porpoise. I took a photo. I was lucky enough to take a photo at that. And when I got back and really zoomed in, I realized that there was, some indecent exposure by the porpoise flying out of the water. And this has since become a thing. So I did not discover this, but, it is how porpoises mate. So males are these sneak maters. So basically, they have this polyamorous society. So males mate with a lot of females, females mate with a lot of males. And as some people may know, another great fact about harbor porpoise males is that their testes are the largest to body ratio in the sort of mammal kingdom. Up to 6% of their body weight is testes during breeding season. And usually big testes mean that they're trying to compete other males with like lots of sperm. So they're sperm swamping each other. But the way that that copulation actually happens is that the males actually kind of sneak up on the females and they sort of leap out of the water beside them while trying to essentially have sex with the females. Always from the left, you guys. They always do it from the left too, which is wild. So weird. So crazy. But the reason I love, first of all, this is just wild stuff. And there's even more. It gets even crazier because research has since shown that female harbor porpoises have all these interesting ways to try and avoid it if they don't want to copulate with a certain male, including these super convoluted, reproductive tracks as well. And the scientist who studies this, Dara Auerbach, calls it an intersexual evolutionary arms race between harbor porpoise males and females, which is crazy. So here's this little unassuming cetacean, which has the craziest sex life of any cetacean on our coast, I think. And they come flying out of the water from the left. And the reason I love this even more is that this was studied through community science. Oh, she brings it all back around. Yeah. So this was really discovered and first written about by a community science and scientist project working in San Francisco Bay. So they study harbor porpoises from the Golden Gate Bridge, which is so cool as well. Super non-invasive way to study porpoises. They look down on them from the bridge and they watch them and they started seeing this exact same behavior. And so they started recording that information in sort of their community science project, collecting photos as well. And indeed, it's always from the left. And, going into this, they have discovered that this is this interesting mating behavior of male harbor porpoises. And since we've learned about the female evolutionary arms race in sex and harbor porpoises, but yeah, so it was something that was first studied by them. And that cool picture I took, the first time I saw it actually was part of a poster that they presented at the last Marine Mammal Conference, because not only did they publish on San Francisco Bay, but they then started reaching out to others saying, who else has seen it? Does this happen in harbor porpoises everywhere? And so far, it looks like, yes, this is just how harbor porpoises mate.
That's even weirder that it happens everywhere. Like, it's already weird, but then the fact that it's everywhere.
From the left too, only. Yeah, like
it seems very like a learned behavior, but then they all do it.
Oh, this is how they do it, and it's sneaking up and flying through the air and things everywhere. So there you go.
Awesome. That might just be my favorite fun flipper fact we've ever had. So
I'm so glad. I'm so glad. If you ever have a chance to see a talk by Dara Auerbach, who is one of the scientists that studies this, she's also the best speaker. And she makes the idea of harbor porpoise genitalia wildly entertaining and engaging.
Amazing.
Oh man, that's so awesome. I don't know if any other story could top that, but do you have... I'm sure that you do have some other amazing whale tales to share. Maybe with less genitalia?
I promise.
Or not. That's not an
Optional.
requirement.
I promise there will be no genitalia from here on out. Okay, a good whale tale. Okay, I thought of two. Do you want humpbacks or northern resident killer whales?
Well, I know what I'm going to say, but it's going to be the opposite of what all of our listeners are going to say. So you might as well go with the residents.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if it's like a wildly good story, but it is, when I was thinking about this, and especially this is kind of, it's kind of making me a little bit sentimental because as I told you, I'm leaving my position with Oceanwise to seek new things. But I am feeling like a little bit sentimental about all the opportunities, amazing opportunities I had working there. But I was recently thinking about a field trip that I did on the North Coast and one of the most special encounters I ever had. So one of the things I loved about moving to the North Coast, so I guess I should preface this with explaining why. So I worked down south out of Vancouver for many years and on that community science project. And we discovered that we knew this, but we did a big analysis of effort on our coast. And we, looked at where people that were sending us in sightings were spending time on the water. We modeled it all out. And of course, as you would expect, there was a lot less effort on the North Coast. So we decided to open an office in Prince Rupert on the North Coast of BC to try and bolster engagement in this project, because a face to a community science project always creates more sort of investment in it, engagement. You're able to kind of keep it going. And so I wanted out of the city. And so I moved up here to do that. And my time up here has moved away from community science. I still do a little bit, but more towards other projects. And part of that was trying to look at, cetacean populations in multiple ways, including, getting observers and citizen science, but also spending more time on the water. So there, long preamble. I was here on the North Coast doing some work with my boss, Dr. Lance Barrett-Leonard, and we were on our boat, the Scanna, and we were doing sort of a survey of the area to look at, which cetaceans we could find and which areas, and gathering data through that. And we had been not finding a ton yet. And so we had been covering a lot of areas and time, and we kind of hunkered down in a bay one night because it was stormy and we were kind of trying to wait it out. And we headed out the next morning out of Bell Passage into Hecate Strait. So Hecate Strait is, a big northern body of water between here and between the mainland and Haida Gwaii. It's known to be kind of rough and tumble when the weather's bad, but this happened to be a really beautiful day. And we kind of headed out there, and even before we had dropped the hydrophone in the water, which we often do just to listen to hear if we hear anything in the distance, any cetacean calls or particularly killer whale calls, in front of us, some whales appeared. And we were, kind of surprised. There hadn't been any talk about killer whales. We hadn't seen anything in the days before. And there they were. And so we're like, oh, great. Good morning. And expecting kind of maybe one matriline or one family. But it was one of those days where you find one and then you realize a little bit further back, there's another group, and then another group, and another group, and another group. And we had all these matrilines, and they were sort of kind of all spread out. There were R's and there were I's, and a few A clan matrilines, and they were all sort of heading down the eastern part of Hecate Strait, heading south down there. And so we kind of bounced between the groups, collecting ID photos, seeing who was there. We would contribute those into Fisheries and Oceans Canada for sort of their annual census of killer whales. And it was a great encounter, really nice. But as we were heading down Stevens Island, we realized that we were approaching a place called Porcher Island. And on Porcher Island, there is a rubbing beach. And I'm sure you guys have probably talked about rubbing on the podcast before, but rubbing is behavior demonstrated by northern resident killer whales, where they come in really close to very specific types of beaches with very specific types of kind of round, smooth rocks, and they rub their bodies along these rocks. The most famous rubbing beach, of course, being at Robson Bight in Johnston Strait, but there are other ones on the coast. So there is a rubbing beach on Porcher Island, and we were going to leave them, and then we realized we were getting closer and closer to that area. And so we thought, maybe we'll hang back and we'll see what they do. And so we kind of gave more space, more distance. We didn't want to be in too close. And sure enough, as they were traveling, in a fairly straight line south, as they got close to that rubbing beach, they literally did like a 90-degree turn into that beach. And one at a time, they grouped up in matrilines, and one matriline would go in and rub against those rocks, and then leave, and the next matriline would come in, and they did it as families, and they kind of literally took turns going in, rubbing, and then moving off of that area. And it was so spectacular. We were able to observe it from a safe distance away without disturbing them, but really get to see it, and we got to hear them. So when killer whales, northern resident killer whales rub, they often have these aberrant kind of calls, so different than sort of the normal stereotyped calls they make. Dr. John Ford calls them Looney Tunes. And so they make all these kind of crazy calls, and you could hear that this beach has a lot of surf action. So you could hear the surf, and you could hear the rocks rubbing through the hydrophone, and then these wild killer whale calls going. It was so beautiful. It was so beautiful, so special. And one of the things that also made it so spectacular is that there was nobody else around. And one of the things I've loved about working on the North Coast is just getting to be in areas alone, and getting to see whales on their own without a lot of vessels around them in sort of these unimpeded ways. And I truly hope that we gave enough space, and that we didn't intrude on that. They definitely did a bunch of behavior, so I'm hoping they didn't, but it was absolutely breathtaking, and one of my most favorite memories I'll take from that position that I'm wrapping up.
It's so amazing, but I also have like this image of like water slides or like slip slides,
yeah,
like everybody lining up in a row.
Yeah. One of the calves in one of the matrilines that was in there draped himself all up in kelp at one point as well. So I think one of the things that's so cool about that is both it really demonstrates sort of their familial bonds, right? Like it really was like they kind of grouped up all of a sudden into the matrilines, and they all were taking turns. But it was like, just such a beautiful example of this idea of culture in another species. And I think that's something that makes us all really so interested in resident killer whales, in killer whales in general, is that idea that they have sort of culture, they have these specific things that they do. And beach rubbing is such like a thing of northern residents. So it was very cool to get to observe that at that place in kind of a really special and amazing way. I feel so fortunate that I got to see it.
Oh, that's so great. Well, that probably almost brings us to the end of this episode. But before we go, we are coming up on an important part of our culture anyways, which is where you get to spend time with your family and maybe you give gifts over the holidays. And so we thought we would share maybe one of Caitlin's favorite ways to make that part of our culture a little more sustainable or whale friendly.
I'm sure you guys have talked about a lot of different ways to do it. I always like to give plugs for gifts that help support research on these animals. And maybe you guys have talked about this before, but there's some really cool adoption programs on our coast here that allow you to help support science in these animals, including some of these community science projects that we've been talking about today. And it's, I think, a neat way, again, to sort of engage people in learning about those animals in their backyard through a sneaky gift. I like to plug those on the holidays. And they're usually a gift that keep giving because you get updates throughout the year about the animal you adopt. So I encourage people to check those out. Again, they're around the world. I know there's similar adoption programs. Here in BC, we have both the killer whale adoption program, and we also, the Marine Education and Research Society has a humpback whale adoption program as well, where you get to learn about your animal, you'll get updates about that animal, and you get a little keepsake too, and usually some cool things like vocalizations and videos and all that kind of stuff. So I think that that's a great way to support science and also give something that will kind of engage you in learning about these animals.
And if it comes with a stuffy, all the better.
Yeah, I think now you can choose stuffy or no stuffy just to reduce stuffy waste. If you, But yes, you can have a stuffy too. Mm-hmm.
Again, I also just have stuffies on the brain because children.
As kids, it's true.
But you're right. As a regular adult, probably it's good to have a no stuffy option.
It's like you only need one stuffy, you don't need one every year.
Yeah, totally.
That's also true, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that would be my holiday gift. It's usually one of my holiday gifts of choice.
Well, Caitlin, thank you so much for joining us today. It was so great to hear from you, to see you again. It's been way too long. You live very far away. Not that we see really anybody because of the world, but...
Well, thank you guys for having me. This is my very first podcast, so super exciting to do it with you all. Really happy to talk about community science, and hopefully this encourages maybe a few of your listeners to get involved with something, whether it's cetaceans or something else. There's lots of those around as well. So thanks for having me, you guys.
And we would really love to hear your thoughts, listeners, on this episode, or any episode, of course. So please visit our website, whale-tales.org, and find links to our various social media handles so that you can drop us a line.
You can also tweet at us directly. I am FHG07. Sarah is Sarah K. Given, no H. And Nicole is Nick F. Can, C-A-N-N, although she'll probably not be responding to her Twitter for the next couple of months.
True.
You can also head to our website to subscribe to the podcast, check out our merchandise, learn about supporting us and becoming a patron, and read over 1,000 whale, dolphin, and porpoise stories.
That's whale-tales.org. Tales like the story, not tales like the animal.
And if you've seen a cetacean, we would love to add your story to our library. Click the share link on our site, contact us on social media, whaleTales.org, or email us a voice memo and tell us all about your incredible encounter.
Thank you again for listening and for supporting us, and we hope you have a whaley great day.